If a threat is made against you or your company, there's no extortion or money demanded. As part of the threat, it's just a general threat against you. So the threat expense extension would pay for response consultants to investigate that threat and see how viable that threat was. It'd also pay for some additional expenses, so maybe to increase security around your person or around your property until the response consultants feel that that threat has now gone away. Assault. So assault would cover if somebody comes onto you at the company premises or comes to a company-sponsored event and they bring a weapon with them onto those premises and then attack and injure people. The assault extension would then cover the personal accident connected to that and any other additional expenses and legal liability as well that might be involved with that type of incident. And finally, we've got target kidnap. So target kidnap is where one crime takes place to facilitate another crime. It was a tactic quite commonly used by the IRA back in the 70s and 80s in Ireland. What they would do is they would force their way into the house and they would hold a family hostage and force the head of the household to go and maybe plant a bomb under somebody's car under threat that the family would be harmed if they didn't perform this act. These days, target kidnap is more of a threat to key holders of banks, jewellery shops, high-end pawn shops, where again, a criminal group might force their way into the house, hold the family hostage, and then force the key holder to go to the bank or the shop and hand over as much of the assets as they can. So what do we need to know when we're underwriting risk for kidnap and ransom? Well, we want to know who we're covering. Are we just covering one or two named individuals, or are we covering the whole global workforce? Where are they based? Are they going to be based over in high-risk countries for a long period of time, or are they just going to be visiting for a couple of days on a short trip? What are they going to be doing while they're there? Are they going to be engaging in activities that might attract the attention of undesirable groups, such as if you're a journalist or something similar like to that? What security are they going to have in place while they're there? And we're talking more for the perceived high-risk countries. What security are they going to have around their accommodation and their workplace and their travel? When they arrive at Port Harcourt Airport in Nigeria, are they going to have a pre-booked car waiting for them, or are they just going to walk out the airport terminal and flag down a local taxi? And finally, we'd like to know also if they've had any previous kidnap or extortion incidents. Particularly with extortion, if they've had an extortion incident in the past and they've paid it, obviously that's going to make them more high target for that group because they feel that if that company's paid previously, then there's a good chance of them paying again. And finally, who's it for? This slide could say anyone, anywhere, anytime, because there's not really any person or any location in the world that we wouldn't consider, so long as the company was being sensible around security. But some of the industries that we do work with, so manufacturing, oil and gas, construction, architects and engineers. We have a lot of charities and not-for-profit organisations on our books because traditionally, when a country is going wrong and everybody's running away, these guys are running towards it to try and help out. Financial institutions, educational institutions, such as universities, colleges, who are sending students abroad to study in other countries. Media companies, and also entertainment or high-profile figures. So again, bands, sports teams who are travelling around the world competing. They look to purchase kidnap and ransom insurance. We can cover annual policies, so again for 12 months up to the maximum 36 months. We can also do single trips, so if you've got a client that are only going to do one 3-day trip to Bogota in March 2020, then we can provide just a short period policy just to cover them for that actual trip. We can do up to limits of 25 million Canadian dollars. There's no excess on our policies. And Well, hopefully what I've done today, if nothing else, is just sort of demonstrate the fact that kidnap and ransom is not just a policy for people travelling to high-risk countries, but it also covers other aspects which could happen closer to home, really. So I guess if anybody's got any questions, or I'm going to be at the booth with Mark for an hour or two after this, so please feel free if you want to come by and stop by and have a chat about anything that I've sort of spoken about to today.
I think the one thing I would add too is that from some of the meetings we had yesterday, we've noticed that it's not just companies where you would think there's some international exposure. It pretty much can be any company, because with the diverse workforces we have, you don't know where people have their families or wherever else. So even if you have an employee or a company that's going to see friends or relatives in India or Pakistan or Middle East or whatever, it's the same risk. And a company that doesn't have any specific exposure, it's not necessarily going to cost that much. So for the sake of $1,000, $2,000 premium, to have this kind of comprehensive coverage in place, because odds are if something were to happen to an employee, of course they're going to be contacting their family, but they're also going to go to their employer. Can you help me out? And the companies that do take this extra step, it's actually going to help them out. And also, what we can address on our side of it, if you come back to the booth, we can also deal with the exclusions that you have in travel plans as it comes to war or terrorism. We can also offer matching plans to just address that exposure. So, any questions, folks?
Is there any company would be number one?
Is there any which company?
Is there a pecking order, like you got a list there, everything from charitable, nonprofit groups to companies? Is there any one specific area that you spend more money on? A specific company, oil, gas, or?
No, not really. No, it's been pretty broad. There isn't really any sort of profile as to necessarily which industry people are more targeted in. It is more, certainly from a traditional kidnap point of view, it is more about where they're going. I mean, charities are targeted a lot because obviously charities are going to certain parts of the world where it's a really unstable country. And, sometimes they do think that, well, if we're going to go and help out the locals, why should anybody want to do any harm to us? But sadly, that's not always the case. So I would say that maybe charities of not-for-profit are maybe a bit of a higher risk than others, but it doesn't necessarily mean to say that actually they're the ones that we've ended up paying out the most claims on.
Charity groups, nonprofits, kids?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Some of the larger charity organisations are getting people kidnapped, 2, 3, 4 times a year, such as the Red Cross and people operating in Yemen, Syria, places like that. Normally, you've got one of two profiles of the response consultants. They're either ex-military, who have been used to operating in these high-risk territories, or ex-police, where they've worked in the negotiation team at the Metropolitan Police or the US or the Canadian equivalent. So they've always got that background there. And traditionally you'll find with the response consultants as well, they'll work for maybe control risks for a while, then they'll move to a different company, and it's a bit like insurance, it's quite incestuous, really.
Can you tell us something about any Canadians who have bought this insurance, like from what areas, or?
I can't really tell you the details because it's a confidential policy, but... No, I mean, we do have Canadian companies on our books and across a broad spectrum of industries. Some that haven't been doing much travel and others that are operating in continents such as Africa.
Yeah, just some examples of a number of the policies we've done. A few of the usual suspects, some of the not-for-profit charitable groups, engineering, mining, and we've done a number where you have a company that has been given a contract to do some work, maybe for the Canadian Embassy somewhere or some other location in the world, and they have this one-off trip coming to Colombia or Africa or somewhere, and they just want to have coverage for that 3 or 4 weeks term. So we'll do that too, so depending on what the so they're all across the board.
And I think just also touching on something Mark mentioned earlier on about travel policies, it's always best to check the small print in those travel policies because firstly, the travel policy may give some kidnap and ransom cover, but it may be sublimited to $10,000, $20,000, which, to be honest, is not really going to be any use at all. And secondly, quite often they will exclude travel to all those countries where you think that's where you're going to get kidnapped anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
How
Sandy?
often is
Somebody in military service.
Pardon me?
Go on, sorry.
Someone in military service.
Somebody that would want this coverage?
Would you cover somebody in military service?
I can't really.
Can you repeat the question?
The question is, can somebody in military service buy this coverage?
I mean, well, firstly, we aren't able to cover individuals as such, so it would have to be someone buying it on behalf of their business. It might be a one-man or one-woman team buying it on behalf of their company. So, but yeah, I mean, there's no reason why we couldn't. It's not something that's ever been raised with us before, but
Yeah. Well, and we're not going to be covering like the Canadian military, for instance. But I mean, if you're talking about contractors, security contractors, stuff like that, that's definitely an area that we could look at.
Yeah. Sorry.
Sandy, sorry.
How often is it kept a secret and only dealt with at the top levels of a company management? If people know that there's kidnapping insurance, then they may be apt to
Yeah.
scheme up something that's...
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a very good point. It's absolutely vital that the existence of the kidnap and ransom policy is kept as confidential as possible. So the smallest number of people within the company should only know its existence. So maybe the CEO and the CFO or risk manager, and then that's it.
Yeah, and usually what I try and do when I sell a policy, I just say that you really stress that confidentiality, because the last thing you want is somebody that's going to be traveling somewhere, they drop down their phone and it has this little bulletin, here's your K&R policy, or so that will definitely put the person at risk. What I would suggest to a company is that they designate a few people that tend to stay in the office as the contact persons, and then you just do a general notice to the employees that is fairly vague. You have your out-of-country travel insurance with all your numbers to call if there's an issue. If anything else comes up, we would welcome that you would contact, Joe Smith or whoever. And that way you're trying to, in a very vague way, direct them to somebody. Because the last thing, if somebody is kidnapped and they start saying that they have insurance, it's going to make that time to get them resolved much longer, and the ransom demands are going to escalate. And plus, you're putting yourself at great risk.
It seems to me with the huge settlements that are paid out, it would be tough to collect enough premium to cover the costs. Is there, do you attempt to recover settlements after they've been paid?
That's a good question, but no, we don't. I mean, to be honest, those high level of ransom payments that you probably see in the media, it's very rare that would be an insured incident, because generally a company buying K&R insurance, whilst we can offer up to 25 million on average, I would say it's between 1 and 5 million limit that they purchase. So you see in the press that maybe 10, 20 million euros has been paid to release French or Italian or German kidnapped victims in the past. Generally, that's the government that are, of those particular countries that are actually paying those ransoms, and they're not actually insured by a K&R policy. We feel that actually if there was a K&R policy in place, that actually does help keep the ransom levels down. And those sort of instances where the governments are paying that level, that doesn't help anybody because that just